All right. Well, welcome to those of you who are here already, and hopefully we'll have some more joining us throughout the evening. My name is Rena Zampiron. I am I am the statewide early education manager for Mass Audubon. So I spend a lot of my time getting to work with early educators across the state who are interested in working with young children around nature-based learning and garden and farm-based learning. So really so excited to be joining you this evening. As you can see, I have put up a little chat prompt. Feel free to respond as you have time in the chat. We're already getting some great responses here. I see that Tina has a special memory of your dad holding corn on the cob for you to eat as a little kid. How special, from his giant garden. And then you got to repeat it many years later with when he did it for your son. That is so special. I can definitely see why a memory like that would stay with you. Um, Yakiria, and please forgive me if I mispronounce any names. Special memory around Christmas, hosting a party at your house. People from different countries, and each family brought a special dish from their own country or a typical dish from their own country. What a great idea. I love that. Um, I have to admit, I've often been the token Jew at certain holiday parties and always have to bring something representative. And my latkes are all right, but my husband latkes are way better than mine. Awesome. Well, feel free to keep sharing in the chat as you have time, any special memories you have around communal eating. And we are going to jump in with our PowerPoint. So this is our Grow Together, Eat Together workshop. It is the fourth workshop in our Kids in the Garden series. And this workshop is really going to focus on the community aspect of the 3 Cs. So thinking about all the ways in which farming and gardening and learning around food can really celebrate your larger community, whether that's your school's community or your neighboring community. And of course, I apologize to any of you who have heard this spiel before in one of our earlier workshops, but I do have to orient us, of course, to the wonderful Mass Audubon. So for those of you who are not familiar, Mass Audubon is the longest continually running Audubon Society in the country. We were formed by 2 Bostonian women who really wanted to put a stop to the fact that people were putting dead birds on their head and calling it fashion. So they set out to do that by starting Mass Audubon. And from the very beginning, in addition to all of the incredible advocacy and conservation work that the organization engages in, one of our hallmark pillars has always been education. And so these women from the very beginning were going straight into schools, talking to kids about the importance of nature and protecting the natural world. And so that's always been a really huge piece of Mass Audubon and what we stand for. Again, for those of you who are not so familiar with us, we are a state-based organization. We are all the way from the Cape and the Islands out to the farthest reaches of Western Mass, north and south as well. We have more than 60 wildlife sanctuaries, and among them, 21 of them have actual staffed nature center buildings where we run all kinds of programming for children and adults and people of all abilities and demographics. And throughout those, we have 7 nature-based preschools that are licensed that run throughout the school year, serving over 200 children and their families. So why does Mass Audubon spend all this time trying to work with young children? Well, it's because we understand the incredible impact that can be had when we work with our absolute youngest learners, starting from when these children are just beginning to open their eyes, take their first steps, and wonder at the world. We really want them to get the maximum benefits and to build that beautiful, strong relationship with the natural world around them. And so we do this through our own licensed nature preschools. We do programs in schools where we come and visit your programs. We do a lot of programs for young families. And then through workshops like this, where you can see that we have the opportunity to work with all of you and help bring more excitement and enthusiasm for teaching about nature. So that's why we're here doing this. So then that brings us to the final question. What is the deal with farm to early childhood? So for those of you that have been doing farm to school for a while, you may be aware of the fact that there's been a lot of really big excitement around farm to school work and building the movement and supporting schools and programs to increase their local healthy food servings and all of that. But only a couple years ago did we really start focusing on including the early childcare field. And so working with home childcare and small and large groups, and even after school groups as well. But why? Why is that such an important thing? Well, first of all, we know that enhancing the quality, that learning about farming and farm education really enhances the quality of these programs, right? We want everyone to be able to benefit from learning about growing and eating their own food. For those of you who got to participate in my workshop a couple weeks ago on curriculum, you know that learning about farming with young children covers many, many different learning modalities and program standards. So there's a great way to fit in your learning requirements and your best practices through farm to early childcare. It's a really great way to engage your families and your communities through the work that you can do around gardening and cooking and eating. It's really beneficial for child development, right? To help develop the child's various skills from social and emotional to fine and gross motor and health and all of that. We want to promote healthy eating and wellness behaviors, and that starts as young as possible. We also want to bring in the discussion of advancing racial and social equality, right? Food is not always an equal thing, and we want to really bring that up and make sure that as much as possible, we are working towards a more equal system. And then last, we really want to help to develop a generation of responsible food eaters, ones who really care about where their food comes from, how it's grown, how it's processed, and how it goes into their bodies. So for all of this and more, these are all the reasons why we're here today. And a huge thank you to Shelburne Farms and Vermont Feed because they have the most incredible resources and information about why to do this, why it's important, and best practices, as of course does Mass Farm to School as well. All right. So, we've already gone through in this workshop series the classroom piece, which was all about the curriculum. We've talked about the cafeteria piece, which was all around cooking and tasting and eating with children. Now we're diving into that third C, which is the community piece. So, this is how do we engage the larger preschool community by engaging our families, the local food producers, policymakers, and more. So, this is going to be a start to this. I will tell you right off the bat, this is not the be all and the end all of how to do this. This is hopefully enough ideas and avenues to get you started. But I do not pretend to be an expert in this field. There is much I am still learning here. I hope you'll have some of your own ideas that you can share with me as well. But I'm hoping that this at least gives you some ways to get started when you think about how do I engage my community around farm to school. All right, so don't worry about doing this in groups of 3. This is gonna be a little bit of an independent study for you all. But I want you to think about a farm or school activity, either one that you have done before or one that you would like to do if you've never done a farm to school activity. Just think of one in the next, 10 seconds or so that you have done or that you would like to try. So I'm gonna let you get that in your mind for a minute. Good, and then once you have that activity in mind, I'd like you to jot down on a piece of paper, or if you like to have it in your head, that's fine too. How could you take this activity that you have in mind and work to make it culturally responsive? How could you work in some cultural responsiveness in it? How could you engage families in this particular activity? And who might you reach out to in your local community to engage in this activity or to, in some ways, benefit this activity? So I'm going to give you about, let's see, how about I give you about 7 minutes for this? So it is 6:10 on my clock here. So I'm going to pause the recording and I will give you 7 minutes to kind of jot down your ideas. And then when you have your ideas, if you feel comfortable, you can start tossing them up in the chat and we'll regroup at 6:17. Recording. So welcome back, everyone. If you don't mind letting me know that you are back in the chat, that'd be helpful since I can't see anybody. And as I said, if anyone would like to share any ideas they came up with for their activity and how to engage the community, I'd love to see some ideas. All right. Well, we'll give oh, here we go. Thanks for sharing, Christine. So Christine has a farm to cafeteria program where they're adding menu items on the lunch line that would better reflect your student body demographic. That's a great goal to be working on. You have many Indian students, and so you've reached out to a local temple canteen for authentic recipes. What a great idea! I love that. That's a great way to engage your community. Tina has the idea to invite some local farmers for your 30 plant challenge and ask them to bring some new or unusual items for the students to taste. That sounds like a really fun one. I'm guessing the 30 plant challenge is trying to eat 30 different plants within a certain amount of time. You can let me know if I'm right on that one. Oh, in 7 days. Whoa, that's a challenge. Very cool. I love that. I'm curious, Tina, if you've tried this before, what's one of the most unusual plants that you've gotten to taste with the kids? And I will say while you're typing that in, Tina, I was recently reminded of a plant I haven't had since I was in elementary school. But they had plants from Israel that we were tasting, and I just remembered that one of the ones they had was carob. And I don't know if any of you have ever tried that before. It's very bizarre. It looks like lotus pods. They're like black locust pods. They're like flat and brown, and you like chew the inside. It's a very bizarre experience, and I'd totally forgotten that we used to do that. Um, yeah, it is a great challenge for the inclusion of local farmers. Well, feel free to keep tossing some more ideas in there, and we'll keep moving right along. All right. So, as far as I'm concerned, invite the community from the very beginning. Let's start to find ways that we can engage them from when we start, right? So, that's right about now. Honestly, this is why I wanted to do this workshop series now, is because now's the time to be thinking about what do I want to grow with the kids? What kinds of plants should we be thinking about growing in our area, whether that is in pots or raised beds or an actual garden in the ground or inside the classroom, aquaponics, whatever your style is, you know, what do we want to include? And so for that, ask your students, ask the school, what do we want to grow? What are we excited for? What has value and meaning to our student bodies? And then further out, what do our families want us to grow? And get some input from the local growers. There may be certain plants that are a huge part of the local community in terms of the kinds of recipes and diets that they like to include that might not be a plant you're familiar with. And so it's a really great idea to ask the parents, ask the local farmers, what are some of the most popular crops to be growing around here? What are things that you really want to have in your recipes? What are some of those important flavors that we should try to include in our garden? You want to figure out what's important to this community. What kinds of plants should we have that's going to have value for those who are a part of this? You also want to talk to local farmers. What grows well around here, right? I'm still a novice at gardening and figuring out what I can grow. I really am hopeful that one of these days I will manage to grow a successful watermelon or cantaloupe, even the teeny little ones. I never get them past the size of a tennis ball. I know it is possible to grow them in this climate, but I also know they are very picky about the amount of water, the amount of sun. So whenever possible, talk to a farmer or someone who knows the growing season a little bit better to get some advice about what's going to grow well here and what might be a little more challenging. Think about what's successful for growing with young children. Remember, my area of expertise is working with little kids. I'm thinking about what's really edible. So if kids are just picking things and eating it, it's okay, right? Easy success. It's going to grow and it's going to grow a lot. So you can have plenty. Things that are not covered in thorns, things that don't have poisonous leaves, right? Things that are not super delicate or unlikely to succeed, right? So you want to think about what is going to give me success with the kids so that we can have something they can enjoy. And it's okay to have some things that don't succeed, but you want to at least think of some things that are going to be an instant success, right? Um, Think about, what kinds of recipes are we thinking of doing? So, we had, I think it was Christine was saying that they have certain recipes they're trying to include. If you know what recipes you want to start including, figure out what ingredients from that recipe you can actually grow around here. And then you'll be able to use some of those plants you're growing in those recipes, right? Um, It's a good idea to be having these conversations at least now, between now and April when things go in the ground. But even now, you can start thinking about what seeds do I want to buy? What do I need to start indoors? How much space are they going to need? So you can be ready to try to grow some of these. And then remember, it takes time to figure out what you want to grow, order and find the seeds, start them indoors perhaps, prepare the outdoor space, and then get them in the ground. Remember, in Massachusetts, we have a very short growing season. So, as many things that are willing to start indoors and then get transplanted, you want to kind of get those ideas going. So, I see we had a couple more people adding ideas. So, I'm going to just backtrack a tiny bit so we can share some of these amazing ideas. Claudia shares that she is a farm to preschool coordinator. And when she creates any type of newsletter or flyer, she makes sure to have translated versions. That is so important, Claudia. I actually am working with a translator right now to get all of our handouts from this translated into Spanish and Portuguese, because in our general areas where I'm working, those are the two most prominent languages that I find, at least for our educators and for many of our families. But you're absolutely right. And you're working with families that speak Spanish and Haitian Creole. That's another really important one. And it's really important to have these available for families in a language that they can read so that they not only can participate, but so that they feel like they really are a part of this community. It says volumes when they see their language reflected in the handouts that are being there. They know that they really are a welcome and wanted part of that community. Absolutely. Um, Tina says you've done the challenge, but you haven't asked the farmers yet. All right. Um, the the star fruit is a cool one. Yeah, I haven't. It's been a long time since I've had star fruit, but that is a fun one to try. Carolyn adds that their homeschooling group is going on a maple sugaring field trip. We are in the middle of maple sugaring season, and today it actually finally felt like it. It has been way too cold and windy lately, but today was a good day for maple sugaring. They've read books, they've learned, a practice of many of the different indigenous cultures in this part of the country, and talking about, I think that's a great way to talk about how these indigenous cultures first started doing this process. From what I have researched, back when the practice was first created, usually the practice of collecting the sap and boiling it would actually go all the way to maple sugar, because maple sugar was easier to store based on the materials that the local indigenous cultures were using, more so than syrup, which usually required glass or metal. And then it wasn't until later that they started creating syrup as opposed to sugar. But that's a great way to talk a little bit about the origins of maple sugaring and the people who have lived here for thousands of years and have been doing that. Anna shares her pre-K group got 3 watermelons growing that didn't make it, but we're a little bigger. Well, that's good. My problem is that my little watermelons are about the size of a tennis ball, and then my dog finds them and runs off with them. But to be fair, they've usually stayed in that tennis ball state for quite a while before he finds them, and they just never seem to get any bigger. So Anna, you and I will need to figure out how to successfully grow watermelons. Christine shares that making garden signs that say welcome in all of your students' native languages. I really love that. And if you need to, Christine, that's a great place to involve the families, right? You can ask the families to write out the different words that you need in their languages. And so now they're being part of that practice as well, rather than you looking it up. Ask those families if they're comfortable sharing the words that you need so that you can make it part of your signage. And I love that you're including fun facts about how these crops are used in different cultures. I actually just found out that kale was like, they don't know exactly where it originated, but they were eating it in like ancient Greece. I was like, wow. And I only found out about kale about 5 years ago. So yeah, there's some really interesting history out there about various plants. I love it. So many wonderful ideas that you're all sharing. Thank you so much. All right. So now that you've had a chance to brainstorm with your students, with your school, with the family community and the local community about what plants you want to grow, now you have to figure out how to get that garden started in a community-based way. So lots of different ways to do that. I definitely recommend, if you have either a local farm stand or a local farm, you can reach out to learn more about your area's planting calendar. Every year when I'm getting ready to start my seeds, I go into Farmer's Almanac online. I'm not quite so old school that I have the hard copies. And I look at what the recommended seed starting dates are for both indoors and outdoors because it does change year to year. And it's usually based on previous dates of first frost, first snow, last snow, whatever they're predicting. And that will give you a sense of when should you start the seeds indoors, when should you transfer them outdoors, which seeds have to start outside. It's a really good place to start to kind of like get a calendar in your mind of when of all of this needs to be happening. Definitely, I recommend reach out to families, local 4-H groups, Eagle Scouts and Girl Scout groups, any agricultural students you may have at local state colleges. Any of those groups or individuals may be interested in helping you to start and even maintain your garden. We actually had our original garden beds built by two dads that had a background in carpentry and just were really excited to buy some lumber and build us some beds. And it was amazing. And their sons came and helped them do it, two of our students. And it was a really great start. And eventually, as our school got bigger and they started to break down those beds, we got an Eagle Scout to come in and do them and build new ones for us. So, it's really wonderful that we were able to have various members of the community come in and help us to build those because I'm not especially experienced at building my own garden beds. Thank you. Dinah is also sharing that she recommends signing up for Harvest of the Month for educators, which has some really great info in there about the history of different crops. So that's another really great plug in there too. So other ways to use the community when you're starting your garden. Definitely think about reaching out to local farmers. Sometimes they have extra seedlings that they aren't able to sell or maybe aren't, perfectly beautiful that they'd be willing to sell at a discount. They may have extra seeds that they can share, especially if you reach out sometimes at the end of a season. Seeds, they go down in terms of their viability, but that doesn't mean they won't still grow. So you could probably get a bunch of free or very discounted seeds towards the end of the fall. And many of those would still be something that you could sprout indoors to plant outside in the next season. So that's a great way to think about getting some really nice discounted seeds. You can also reach out to some families. I know I'm going to be starting tons and tons and tons of seedlings, and then I don't have enough room in my garden for them all. So many of your families may be growing seedlings at their house and have a few extras that they wouldn't mind sharing or donating to the class. So you can find out if any of them are willing to share their seedlings or their experience as gardeners. They may come in and talk with your kids. Um, Local libraries are a great place to go. Many of them engage in seed swaps. So they may have a place where there are extra seeds that you can come and take some and drop off extras that you don't need. Towns sometimes do seedling sales or seed sales that you can use. And then, as I said before, think groups like Eagle Scouts and Girl Scouts, and sometimes even 4-H, they have a volunteer requirement where they have to donate service hours to various projects. And building garden beds or helping to maintain garden beds is a great project for them to do. Even some high schools. I had like 40 hours of volunteer work that I had to do when I was in high school, and I loved it so much that I made my career out of it eventually after 4 years of doing it. So definitely lots of great places where you can find volunteers in your community that might be interested in taking part of all of this. All right, so now that you've got the garden started, now you got to keep it going, which for many schools is the most daunting part, especially if you are a school that is 9 months and you don't have a summer program at your site. Because now, from mid June to at least mid August, if not mid September, you have no one around to take care of the garden and enjoy all of that bounty. So, what are you going to do? So, first of all, request help from your community, right? You may have people in the community who are either fully retired or semi-retired and are gardeners by hobby or by practice. Again, agriculture schools from local community colleges or tech schools might be interested in coming and helping out. 4-H students, family members may want to come in and be a part of this. You may have certain teachers that really love this and it's part of their passion. Think about talking to local farmers for ideas on how do we manage pest control, weed control, best practices. I've spoken to many farmers over the years, and they love to have their brain picked for some of these ideas. Just make sure that you are appreciative and respectful of their time, especially during the busy season. You may want to plan ahead and try to ask these things over the winter when they're a little less busy, or find out when is a good time to talk to them. If there's any way you can compensate them for their time, even more so. Christine says it would be helpful to look for ideas on fencing, on keeping out groundhogs. I found a surefire way to keep groundhogs out, but I don't think it'll work very well for you. I have two very large male dogs, and they pee on every edge of my garden, like every garden bed they're marking. And I have not seen a single groundhog anywhere on my property, but probably not very efficient for school systems. So, good idea to talk to farmers about ideas there. Um, I love the idea if you have a garden that's up and running, thinking about doing something like hosting a farmer's market on site for your families. And then the kids can harvest the plants, wash and prepare them, set up the little marker, decide if you're going to have prices or if it's going to be free. I love the idea of having the kids make a taste test for families as they're coming in to taste something made with products from the farmer's market. So, this is a really fun thing that you could do from little kids all the way up. I know we have at least one fourth grade teacher here, having them do different parts of it, making the signs, making the prices, doing the cooking, selling the goods, making advertisements for it. Just lots of different ways the kids can be involved in the process. Um, One of you already mentioned talking to local chefs. That's a great way to get some fun ideas on recipes. Hey, we wound up growing a lot of eggplant. We're not quite sure what to do with all of these. Do you have any good ideas? Maybe you could come in and do a cooking demo with your garden. And this would be a great way to advertise your business and see if families want to come and visit your restaurant. And then think about ways you can share the bounty with either your families, if that's kind of the size of food that you're producing, or sometimes even local food shelters and pantries. If you're able to make a little extra and you want to give back to the community, what a wonderful partnership between your school and part of your community that would really benefit from it. All right. So cooking and eating. This is a big part of that community aspect, right? Food is such a communal act, right? Cooking and eating together is a huge community action. And we talked about this a lot with cooking, but I think it's important to bring it back up again. So when we think about cooking and eating, it's important that if you have any cooking staff or nutritional staff or food suppliers, that all of them are part of that conversation. Let them know that it's important to you to have local and fresh foods, but also to have culturally relevant foods as well as part of those meals, right? What are the kinds of flavor palettes and spice palettes that are part of your school's culture? What are some of the fruits and veggies that are going to be familiar and new, right? You want to make sure that there's plenty of opportunities for kids to see themselves within the food and also be exposed to other cultures and parts of the world through their food. When possible, it's really amazing to get to partner with local farms for ingredients, even if it's just a small amount, even if it's just for a taste test, even if it's just one product. If you can start to build a partnership with a local farm to get some ingredients, to do some meal planning and recipe ideas, it starts to build that relationship that hopefully has potential to grow. Engage your families to share some recipes that are important to their family that they would like to maybe see at your school, and let's see how can we get some of these recipes into our program, whether it's one special event that we do or if we can make it part of our regular menu, especially if they have recipes that are one of their go-to easy or warm or filling or whatever sort of what they like about that recipe, seeing if you can kind of bring some of that in. It is always very important to be aware of and considerate of different cultural and health related practices around food, whether that means allergies, whether that means families that practice halal or vegetarianism, veganism. I practice keeping kosher. There's many different cultural, religious, health related practices around food. And that doesn't mean that every single meal has to always have every single thing edible for everyone, but there should always be something that every child can eat, right? Everyone should be able to eat some of the foods there, and they should all be healthy, delicious foods, right? So just always being cognizant of making sure that everyone has access and is able to eat the foods that you have. Um, and to that effect, it's okay to have conversations with families about their dietary practices so that you understand. We want to make sure that your child feels comfortable and able to participate and enjoy the foods that we have here. Tell me more about what sort of things do you like to eat at home? What are things that you prefer to avoid? Try to get some more information, and that's okay. If we do this from the standpoint of being respectful and wanting to know more and build our own knowledge base and create an environment for all of the children where everyone feels welcome and included. That I think that that's a very important piece to have. And then, as you said, finding ways to highlight and honor the food from all cultures and backgrounds, to teach respect around food and that everyone eats food, and you may see kinds of foods that you don't recognize. You may see ones that seem strange to you. You may find ones that you don't enjoy the flavor of or the smell of, but that we always have to be respectful around other people's food choices. And that, that very traditional, we don't yuck anyone's yum. That's really important. And it is something that I think all schools are working on. And there are some great books out there around how to help support children around being respectful around food. But that's a very important practice that does need to be an intentional part that we tie in. All right. So, how do we center the foods of all peoples in your curriculum? Again, I am not an expert on this. These are some starting ideas. If you have additional ideas, please share them. But this is just to kind of get some of those ideas flowing. So, first of all, especially when we're talking early education, make sure that any of the play food that you have in your dramatic play area, that any posters, that any children's books that you have, that they're featuring foods from all different cultures, from all different parts of the world so that children can see themselves and other cultures reflected. You don't want anyone to feel like they're not a part of this because that very much sets someone apart and feeling like they're not part of the community. And it's the same message that then goes on to that child's family, right? They want to be able to see that they are included in this classroom. Make sure to have conversations about different types of food that might be new or different, or ones that are familiar to members of the class. So when someone has something, say, "Oh, wow, that's really neat. Can you tell me more about it?" "Oh, I think I've had that before. Has anyone had that? Do you know where it comes from? What does it taste like?" So encouraging kids to have open conversations where it's really interesting and really neat when someone is eating something we don't recognize. And isn't that a cool opportunity to learn more about it? And maybe we can take out a world map and find out where is this food normally eaten, and where was it grown, or where did it come from, and how far did it come to get here, and who likes to eat it, and all of those ideas. Include books that have all different kinds of cooking experiences. And that is more than just the cultural identity of the foods. There are books about intergenerational cooking where grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins are cooking together, where people are coming together to share meals from all different walks of life and all different food interests and needs and explorations are happening. So I really have to say the children's literature world has definitely upped their quality and diversity about books and food and cooking. And there's some really amazing ones out there. And I will say I am not on their payroll, but if you're looking for a place that has some really great children's books around all different kinds of cultural food, check out Barefoot Books. They're a small local women run company out of Massachusetts. And if you are an educator, you get a 20% discount every time you order with them. So just make sure you check that out because they have some really great books about cooking with different recipes. And most of them have recipes in the back of the book, so you can try them. And of course, really important, have opportunities for kids to experience new flavors, produce, and meals. And we all know it takes like 8 times being exposed to a new food for many people to develop a taste for it. So you've got to have multiple opportunities for kids to try new things and familiar things and get to learn through those experiences. Before I jump on to the next slide, I know I threw a lot at you. Any comments, any questions? All right. Well, if you do come up with questions, feel free to toss them up. I really don't mind stopping midstream or when I pause for breath to answer them. I really do want to make sure that this information is useful for everyone. Oh, don't worry, Christine, about having to write all of this down. First of all, it's going to be recorded, so you can always go back and find it. I do have a couple of print resources that I'll be sending to Dinah after this, including places where you can get more culturally diverse vegetable and fruit seeds. So a place where if you're looking for very specific products that maybe aren't part of the more mainstream, Johnny's or Burpees, you can get some information there. Um, Definitely, I can send out my book list, which I sent out before, that has all different topics, including culturally diverse cooking opportunities, and how to teach respect about different foods. So I will, no, I know, I will send some of these resources out afterwards as well. But yes, I get you're joking. All right. So we're going to do another little activity. Um, and this is one that resonates with me. I understand if parts of this resonate with you and parts of it don't, that's okay. Use this activity in the way that is meaningful to you. But I would like to give you a few minutes on a piece of paper or just in your head to think about a time when you felt left out by food choices, whether this was a group event, a family event, you were traveling, whatever it may be. Think about a time when you felt left out by food choices available and how that made you feel, or how did it affect how you engaged in that moment? How did it affect, what you might have done after? And then, when is a time when you felt like you were seen or included in your food choices? How did that feel? And how did it affect your engagement? And then lastly, for yourself, why do you think that these are memories you've held on to, and why are they significant to you? So I'm going to give you until 6:54 on this one. That gives you 10 minutes to jot down your ideas. Again, engage in what feels meaningful to you, but feel free to skip whatever doesn't resonate. When you feel ready to type up any responses, if you choose to, in the chat, that's great. And I will share some of my thoughts as well after I hear from you. But 6:54, we'll come back together, and I'm going to pause our recording now. Awesome. So thank you to those of you who've already shared in the chat. I'm going to read them out. And if anyone else would like to add, please do so. So Tina shared a story about how at your school, every grade takes a turn bringing in a monthly breakfast buffet for the staff, and that in the past you haven't engaged much because you can't eat most of it due to various dietary needs. But when your grade hosts, that you make sure that all kinds of choices are there, because you understand that many people have different dietary needs, like gluten-free, dairy-free, or nut-free, or want healthy choices, and you want to make sure everyone feels included. That's a beautiful story, Tina. And I will say that frequently the people that are thinking about these things are ones who've experienced it themselves. So if you've had times when you've been unable to eat at various events or had very limited options because of your dietary needs, I think that often leads to a certain increased awareness and desire to ensure that you have opportunities where everyone can eat. In my family, my husband has many health needs around food. I keep kosher, so I have that element. So, we're always very cognizant of different needs that people who visit our house may have and how we can accommodate them so there's something that they can safely eat. Thank you for sharing. Sarah adds that she and her kids are vegetarian, so you often have to bring your own food to events and family gatherings, which can be a challenge and awkward. I feel you. Being my family all keeps kosher, my husband's family does not. And so I've experienced that a lot as well at family experiences. And how do we find ways to make that comfortable? But you had a great experience recently where there was a potluck lunch at work. The coworkers were sure to make sure some of the dishes were ones you could enjoy. And the best part was that both ladies made you something from their cultures that you could try. You felt so honored and was thrilled to get to share in something so meaningful with them. Doesn't it feel so incredible when someone takes that little bit of extra effort to make sure you can participate? It feels like the world, right? It's like the biggest thing they could have done. I've certainly shared that experience. I'm grateful that you had that as well. Claudia shares, being someone who eats mostly plant-based, you've attended dinners with friends and past partner families where meat was in nearly every dish. Typically, the women would be more understanding than the men towards your dietary preferences and prepare you an alternative dish that had no meat or dairy. And despite feeling thankful, You felt a certain amount of judgment from certain family members, and some have joked about it in front of you. That feels awful, doesn't it? Oh my goodness. On the contrary, your fellow coworkers always make sure there's a plant-based option for you whenever food's being served at work events. It makes you feel grateful for their consideration, and they've never questioned your choices. And you find people are more accepting of you being plant-based than they were 10 plus years ago. I hear you, Claudia. Growing up as someone who kept kosher, no one ever thought about it. And people would be like, well, why can't you just pick the shrimp off? I'm like, because they've been cooked together. Like it doesn't work that way. Or I've asked for Caesar salad without chicken, and they're like, why would you eat that? That's like a crime against humanity. It's like basically lettuce. And it makes you feel so small when people are not only not understanding, but almost belittling, and it makes you feel so included when they go out of their way to include you. And I will say from my experiences, it's when they include you in a way that doesn't feel like it was an inconvenience or stressful for them. It's simply because, oh, well, I know they can't eat this, so I'm just gonna make this dish that everyone can enjoy. And that little difference there can actually be really huge. I've had situations where people have tried to accommodate me, and then because they didn't ask how to do it properly or they just made assumptions, they actually made something that I still couldn't eat, and then I felt 10 times more guilty because they went to this extra effort, and either I can't eat it or they told me afterwards and I realized I just ate something I wasn't supposed to, and then they feel bad, and it just becomes such a big deal. Um, yeah, there's a big piece to just feeling like you're included, and it was just, of course you made something that everyone could eat, as opposed to, "Well, we did this specially for you, and we did this and this and this," and then you kind of feel almost, like, stressed out about it. Um, so I will say to you all, first of all, thank you so much for sharing, because I know that this can be very personal. It is clearly very personal for me. It seems that it's resonated with some of you, and I appreciate that you felt comfortable being honest and sharing. I've never done this activity before. This particular slide was brand new for today. And I debated with myself whether or not to do it because I didn't know if I would be the only one who felt this way. And everyone was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But clearly, I see that this resonates with many of you. And so it makes me feel more seen, to know that other people have felt this way before and have shared experiences. And look, more are popping up. This is incredible. Thank you all. Katie says, growing up, you were at a church dinner with a group of kids around the same age, and they were serving some sort of bean soup. And you were rather a picky eater at the time, and you didn't really touch the soup. Um, and you told the pastor you were full rather than saying you didn't want to eat what he'd made, and you felt uncomfortable because everyone was watching you. Um, you would like to try it again now, but in that moment, I totally understand why you didn't feel comfortable doing so. And, it's unfortunate that it was an experience that you felt like you feel regret now that you weren't able to do so. And how different might that have been if they had been a little bit more patient, a little more understanding of not wanting to try at the time. Um, Yakiria says, I'm not a picky eater, but that's probably why I don't have something to share. That's fine. But your husband is Salvadorian and you are Puerto Rican. So you learned how to prepare typical dishes for him. So he felt at home and not forced to eat your typical kind of food. That's also really amazing. My husband learned how to cook kosher for me. That's not how he was raised. He knew about it, but it was not ever his practice. And he's been incredibly respectful. And yes, it's more expensive. And yes, it's an inconvenient and complicated. And we have like twice as many dishes as anyone should ever have. And it's always meant so much to me that that was something he was willing to do because he knew it was important to me. Lydia shares, when you were keeping full vegetarian, you never wanted to inconvenience people at group gatherings, so you would often bring your own food. You knew it was your choice, but it can be awkward at food centered gatherings, to not be eating what everyone else is eating. Yeah, it does feel weird when everyone else can eat something. As a parent who's raising my child to keep kosher, when we go to events, I have to tell them what they can and cannot eat. And they're really good about it. But I know that sometimes it probably makes them feel othered when they can't eat what some of the other kids are eating. Um, More recently, you connected with your cousin's wife about how much you both love cooking, and you planned out meals you could cook together with your whole family. It was a ton of fun, and everyone was part of the meal prep. I bet that felt incredible getting to do that, right? And it was something that, it wasn't specifically like, well, since you don't want to eat meat, we're going to do this. No, it's, wouldn't this be a fun thing for us to do together? And becomes this, community event with you and your cousin or your cousin's wife, and it's not about being different, it's about you both love cooking and you're doing something you love together, right? Christine wants to encourage grades 3 through 5 students to think about how much it would mean to a friend to try a new food that is meaningful to their family. Any ideas? Great one, Christine. I do like that. Um, I can think of at least, well, you know what? There's some really good books out there. I have to say, books are always my first answer to everything. Um, there's some do it better than others, but I love ones that show even how a similar food can be eaten and prepared in so many different ways. There's a series of books, Everyone Bakes Bread, Everyone Cooks Rice, Everyone Eats Beans, and I think Everyone Eats Soup. And it's a brother and sister who go house to house. And at every house, somebody's making rice, bread, beans, noodles, whatever it is, but they're all a different cultural recipe. And so, wow, everyone eats the same thing, and yet they're totally different. And I think that's kind of a fun one. Um, but, I think a really fun one to do might be, I don't know, Christine, if you were here during my first workshop, but the food memory one, where kids draw a face on a piece of paper, but the paper is folded so that you can fold up the forehead and down the mouth. And in the mouth part, the kids draw a special recipe of some kind of food that they eat with their family. And in the forehead, they write some words about what that food makes them think of, like warm, comforting, family, hugs, grandpa, whatever it may be. And then the kids can share that with each other. They share their food memory with another friend, and so they can start to learn about some of the special foods that have meaning to them, and they can share the story of, why is that so special, or what's one memory you have about making that or eating it, and why do you like that one? So they start to think about what a special food for different kids might look like. And then we are going to do an activity a little bit later where we think about those special recipes and then where do they come from? So thinking about, how did this recipe become part of my family? Why is this recipe part of my family? What ingredients does it use? And how does that represent my family, my culture, my whatever it may be? So thinking about that as well. Um, the other book that comes to mind, and I would suggest reading it before sharing it. I like it, but I can see where it has some shortcomings. The book is called Yoko, and it's by Rosemary Wells, and it's a little girl who likes to eat sushi. She brings sushi and other Japanese items for lunch, and the other kids make fun of her. And so the teacher decides that they're going to have a food culture day where every kid brings in food from another country or another culture. And the rule is supposed to be everyone tries a little bit of everything, except nobody tries her sushi. And she's feeling really sad, except for one little friend who's not quite sure. But then he tries it and it's like, wow, that's really good. And so the two of them start to bring in lunches that they share with each other. Um, I think it's a bit of a sad message that most of the kids don't try it. But I do think it's really sweet how the teacher wants to have this idea where we can celebrate and taste everyone's different food. It's going to be a big celebration. And I do think it shows small ways in which we can start to try other things. And then the other one is, let me see, I think it's an unusual pig. I always screw up the name. It's Well, it's on my list and I'll get it for you, but it's either the ordinary pig or an unusual pig. And again, other kids are making fun of her for her food choices, and she's feeling very othered and she wants to eat food like everybody else. And then her family takes her to the city to visit a museum, and then they go to a playground where there's a bunch of food trucks, and she meets another pig who's eating something that she's like, oh, that's so weird. And she's like, well, maybe it's different for you, but I like it. And she tries it and she starts to see that there are many different people, many different cultures, many different worlds all in one place. And it gives her the confidence to say to other kids, maybe it's weird for you, but I like it, and kind of stand up for that. So lots of different ideas out there. Hopefully, some of those are helpful. If anyone else has any suggestions, by the way, for Christine, for ways to introduce how it would feel to try a new food of a friend and see what that's like, um, feel free to toss that up in the chat. That'd be great. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to share about food inclusion or exclusion? I do think that this is a charged topic, but I'm really grateful that you all felt willing to jump in because I think it does happen a lot and we don't always think about it. All right. So here's another thing that maybe would help Christine as well, but the idea of cooking in the classroom, right? Let's provide an opportunity where we can cook someone's special recipe and try it together and see what we think. So, how can we think of ways to adapt a certain recipe to meet various abilities or dietary needs? How can we highlight different cultures through our choice of recipes or ingredients? Thinking about ways to bring the home into the school by trying and sharing recipes. So, that would be, inviting kids to bring a recipe from home that they would like to try to make, and then providing an opportunity for taste tests for children to try with their families or at pickup time or take home. I think this is another really cool idea where if you make a recipe with the kids, maybe one that they had brought in, um, have them make the recipe together. And then, if it's younger kids at picked up time, if they have to go home maybe for a special family event, have an opportunity where the kids and families can try it together would be really neat. So they could share, this is so and so's recipe. Their family loves to make this during this time of year or for this holiday. Um, you know, we invite you to taste it. And, here's a map and it shows where some of these ingredients come from. And it shows where this recipe started or where various versions of this recipe come from. Anna's sharing that your coworker always shares food from her home country for you to try. She's from the Philippines and you're a picky eater, but you always try them. That's so incredibly respectful, Anna, of you to try them. And it's okay to try something and say, you know what? That's not my jive, but I'm really glad you like it. Any of you who are early educators probably know the Piggy and Gerald books, right? By Mo Willems. And there's one about Will You Try My Slop? And Piggy really, really wants Gerald to try pig slop, and Gerald really doesn't want to, but doesn't want to hurt Piggy's feelings. And he does try it, and he doesn't like it, but he's very respectful of it, or tries to be. Um, and so, yeah, there is something to be said about trying something from somewhere else, and it's always okay to say, "You know what? I'm so glad you enjoy that. It's not really my thing, but I'm glad I tried it." So yeah, just all different ways to, kind of encourage kids. And remember, kids are A, more likely to try something if they cooked it themselves, and B, more likely to try it if they helped grow the plants themselves. And then even more so if they helped from the entire stage. We are going to decide what we want to plant. We're going to organize the garden and lay it out and start the seeds and grow them and water them and weed them and harvest them and prepare them and cook them. They are gonna be much more likely to eat it than if you ask the cafeteria to make the recipe, and they're gonna be more likely to eat it if they're sharing it with the whole class, sharing it at a special school assembly, sharing it with families coming in. Anything you can do that really carries them from the beginning to the end of the cooking process, from the growing and the planning, the more engaged they are leading up to it, the more likely they are gonna be to try it and the more excited they will be about it. All right, so community, what are some of these ways that we can reach out to the communities? We mentioned a few of these, but always good to just repeat, especially because new ideas may be sparked. Definitely reaching out to local farms, farmers markets, and some of these are seasonal, some of these are year round. So you may need to do a little bit of research in your area to find out when and where farmers markets are happening. Farm stands, food forests, which is terminology often used in cities where they have little community gardens and farms right within the city that are supposed to be very accessible, so that the local community can walk over and use them. And there's volunteers that often help, and educational programmings and cooking programs. All of these are great avenues to come and explore. Agricultural colleges or tech programs. There are many high schools that have agriculture programs that are tech schools, as well as the colleges as well. Current and retired gardeners, 4-H, Eagle Scouts, Girl Scouts, all of those. Here's one people don't often think about: grocery stores. I worked with a school that was really excited. They partnered with their local grocery store and got to do a field trip there. And the kids got to go and visit and look at some of the ingredients on the different boxes and find out where some of the produce had come from and talk to somebody who worked there. Like, that's a really cool idea, right? Why not go to where people are often buying food and learn a little bit more about how it got there and different parts of foods that come from all over. Some come from close by, some are grown really far away. And other food suppliers, right? Who else is supplying your food? One of the schools I'm working with has partnered with a local dairy farm, and they've had the opportunity to meet the farmer who comes in and delivers the milk early in the morning once a week. And I think they've sent photos from the farm and photos of some of the cows so they can really get to know where that food is coming from. And then a couple other areas you may not have thought of, things like beekeepers. I have met several apeists. Yes, that is the fancy term for a beekeeper. Every single one that I have met loves talking about what they do. Kids, adults, they love it. Many of them will even volunteer their time to come in and show their different materials, but if you're even able to compensate them, so much the better. But they have so many cool tools that they use and the gear that they wear and the information they can share is a really awesome resource to reach out to them. Livestock managers, so those who are taking care of cows and chickens and sheep and all of the work that they do. We so often focus on the fruits and vegetables that we forget about all the other food that we eat that comes from farms, right? So reaching out to livestock managers, even if they can't visit, we've done virtual interviews where the kids generated questions they wanted to ask them, and then we got them on Zoom and we asked them our questions and learned more about the work that they do. You know, reaching out to chefs that might want to come in and do a demo or a video chat with them, ask them their questions, nutritionists. There's so many people out there with so much experience that you can tap into. All right, so community events. So this is another opportunity for you to jot just a few ideas down. I won't give you a crazy amount of time here, but almost all schools I found do some kind of community event throughout the year, whether it's just for families or parents, or for alumni and older siblings or younger siblings or grandparents, or sometimes it might be a larger community where you're inviting the whole town or the neighborhood or certain members of your community that aren't teachers but are part of the school community. So, thinking about at least one community event that you typically do in your program, think about where does food fit into that event, if at all, is food involved? And then what is one new idea that you could add to that community event that would include more diversity or inclusion through food at that event. So let's say that it is one event that we do at our school is we do a winter storytelling night, and we typically offer like hot chocolate and cheese and crackers. So what would be one new idea I'll think of that I could add in that situation that would highlight more diversity and inclusion? So I'll give you just a few minutes for this one. We'll come back at 7:20, and if you want to just jot an idea or two into the chat, that's fine. And if not, you do not need to, but I'm going to pause our recording for a moment. All right. So I see we have one response already to the inquiry about community events. So Lydia shares that they have a spring and winter concert that is for the whole school community. And part of that is the cookies at the end, which are always a big deal. It would be fun if someone from the bakery that makes them could talk to the class, or if the students had a hand in making or choosing the types of treats for the concert. Wouldn't that be cool? I'd love it if each class, maybe, or each grade could decide one of the treats that's there. Um, wouldn't it be really cool if you could try a couple of different desserts from different cultures, right? You could have things like baklava, and you could have, ruglach and all kinds of different sweets. That would be a really neat idea. But having the kids be more involved in it or getting to meet the baker would be really cool. Yakiria shares at your center every year, they have a family fun night at the end of the year. They have performances, band, and celebrate the preschoolers who are going to kindergarten. Before the pandemic, different parents, staff, and some community members bring a dish to share with everyone, which you stopped during the pandemic. I know that really kind of what put a damper on all that stuff. It would be super cool to get to go back to it for sure. But again, maybe there could be an opportunity where maybe the classes can try a couple of different recipes from families where they make things. That would be really neat. And certainly really cool if you can go back to having them bring in to share. I love that idea. Claudia shares within your farm to preschool program, you host something called produce events at the Child Care Center from July to October. After weeks of fun classroom lessons and planting and taking care of a garden at the garden center, families are invited to the produce events at pickup time to watch you conducting healthy recipe demonstrations in front of the center. Very cool. You have a new recipe every week and you hand out free samples. You also partner with local farmers to procure local food into the centers. This year, you've applied for 4 grants and hope to receive enough funding to buy produce from the farmers every week. Wouldn't that be amazing? And hand out a couple of vegetables in the form of produce bags to every family at the center. That is such a great goal. You use the same produce you give away for free in the recipe demonstrations, teaching families how to prepare farm fresh produce they just received. I love that idea, Claudia. I think that's really neat, especially that you're giving them the ingredients they need to make that particular dish. I would also say if you can do so, if there's a particular vegetable or two in there that might be slightly less common, have a couple of other ideas of things they can do with that. For example, when I just did my kale cooking demo with my schools out in Springfield, I had a list of recipes, and the recipes reflected certain flavor profiles and ingredients that are common in different cultures. So there was one that was from North India, and there was one that was from Japan, and there was one that was South African. And so trying to find a couple of different types of recipes that use the same produce so families could maybe try some of those different recipes or find ones that use some of the similar flavors that they're used to. So that's another way that you could do that. But I love that work you're doing. Lindsay shares that you have found sustainability is an area where there can be a disconnect. Yeah, there's a split between people who are passionate about the subject, who are a bit uncomfortable with many disposables or non-composting and so on. And then there are folks who are intrigued but overwhelmed and inexperienced, but don't know where to start. Introducing just a couple of very doable ideas seems to be very well received. Awesome. Love that. Even something as simple as trying to reduce waste from when you're cooking. So if you're doing a project with carrots, maybe you could also have a second activity that uses the carrot tops. So you can show, hey, here you have one product, and instead of wasting the tops, you can actually use them for this. Would be a really fun way because then they're getting twice as much food, right? Because they are using it, and it's also more sustainable because there's less waste. So thinking if there are some things we can do like that. But I love that you bring that up because that's a really tough one. Carolyn shares new idea. All dishes served will be labeled with the ingredients and have vegetarian and vegan options available. I love that. I am lucky enough to work for an organization where they are incredibly respectful of different dietary needs, and that is standard operating procedure. When we do either a potluck or when they cater the lunches, it always is very clearly labeled. This one is vegan, this is vegetarian, this is gluten-free, this is, dairy-free, like all of those, so that it's always very clear. And they always have enough of everything. The worst is when they have 2 vegetarian plates and all the rest have meat. And then, like, even some people who aren't vegetarian sometimes want to eat the vegetarian plate. And then those of us who can't eat the meat dish now have nothing to eat. So it's not just about having a few available. It's about making it very clear what's there and then having enough of everything so people can take what they want and nobody really gets left out. Yakiria also shares for your anniversary, you're planning to launch your own cookbook. I love doing that. They'll have diverse recipes that will be shared by your center's families. That's a really fun one. I love doing that around the fall Thanksgiving season because it's a really nice thing that, when we think about, there's a lot of community eating in the fall, right? And all of those crops and produce that are ready. So making a cookbook where family sends in recipes. One of my daughter's classes did that, and I thought it was great. There was also 4 recipes for chocolate chip cookies, but you know what? They were all different, which was great. So yeah, I think that's really neat. Thank you all for sharing. And these are all different community cooking events at some of our schools here, whether they were cooking and eating, or we're working with a couple of specialists here that are helping us tap maple trees and doing some cooking demos. So lots of different pieces of our community there. All right. Full disclosure here, this is not necessarily my area of most strength, but is important to include. And if you want more information, I am fielding this to Mass Farm to School and they can point you in the right direction. But when we're talking about the greater community around farm early childcare, we would be amiss if we did not include government and policymakers, because much of our grant funding that enables us to do this comes from either the state or the governmental level. So, how do we ensure that we are engaging that community, which is so important to the work that we do, to make sure that we can continue to do this work? Um, so, as I say, this could be a workshop all on its own, and heaven knows I am not the one to teach it, but it is a very important topic. It is important for you to promote the incredible work that you're doing, because these stories are then what gets used for governors and senators and congressmen and all those people that are out there finding the money. These are the stories they're going to use to say, this is why we have to do this. This is why it's important. This is why it matters. Because you can have someone out there spouting statistics, but when you share a beautiful story about your children that grew these cherry tomatoes and then they made this salsa and they had a big party and all the families came, and maybe you even invited your local, mayor or whatever to come and try it, whatever. Those are the stories that matter. So first and foremost, promote your work. Don't be afraid to request resources or say, this is important. We need this. This money is important. It's doing something. And to say, we also need this, right? You need to make this real. You need to make this available, because they hopefully will listen, right? Um, state education departments, right? DESE and EEC. It's important for them to hear this too, right? Because they have a lot of people that are out there doing this work and have the ears of people that need to hear it. So if you tell them, we need more opportunities for getting local food into our program, we need more opportunities for starting gardens at our program, share this with DESE, share this with EEC, share this with whatever your governing body is if you're not in Massachusetts, because they'll hear it, right? Reaching out to public, city, or state health departments or rec departments or agriculture departments. I've worked with the Boston Public Health Commission, and they had this awesome grant to create workshop trainings for home childcare workers that wanted to learn more about how to include fresh local food as part of their program, right? So they care about this. This is important. They often have access to grants and are looking for ways to use it in these sort of meaningful ways. So reaching out to those various departments. And then, of course, going to the top, going to the state and city and local representatives, senators, mayors, governors, share your stories. See if you can get them out in the newspaper, even in the local newspaper. It's really awesome. The more they see and hear these stories, the more excitement is going to be generated around farm to school and farm to early childcare. And the more people will understand why it's so valuable and want to dedicate more money to it so this can continue to happen. So please don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to share the stories and the photos of what you are doing, to invite people to come and join these events. And Mass Farm to School can definitely help with that, at least in pointing you in the direction. Mass Food for Mass Kids is another great program as well. I know that there's a summit coming up in May. So there's a lot of opportunities out there that you can learn more about and get involved. So we can spread the word, because we need more money to do this. It's not easy. All right, so we're starting to wrap up the night, but I did want to bring us through one of my favorite activities around this. And it's all thinking about, food unites us, and food also identifies the diversity within us. Whoops, my goodness, my computer's acting weird. All right, so I want us to try mapping out our food. So we're going to do this on the Padlet, and I will be able to, I'll drop this in just a second when it's not currently sharing. But what you're going to do on the Padlet is you can make little sticky notes on it. And I want you to write down on each sticky note, you can do as many as you like, a favorite family recipe. And then either on that note or you can do it separately, try to think about where's the geographic origin of one or two of the main ingredients of that recipe. It's okay if you don't know. And then if you happen to know, where's the recipe itself from? Where did this recipe originate? And again, if you don't know, that's okay. But see what you can do. I'm going to stop sharing that for just a moment and X out of that. And I'm going to put the Padlet link in the chat so it's more easy for you to access it. And I'm really hoping this works for you. So Please let me know if you are not able to access that. It should be public to everyone, but please do let me know if it's not working. I'm just checking comments on. All right, if someone can just like give me the heads up if you're able to actually get on that page, I want to make sure. Padlet and I are only sort of friends. Yes, so if you want to write something on here, you should see there's a little blue plus sign down towards the bottom, and if you click on that, it should bring up a little area. You can put a subject, but you don't have to, and then you just type where it says, "Write something beautiful." Oh, thank you, Dinah. Dinah was able to get something up. Thank you, Dinah. Yeah, so you can just put your recipe, and you can see here it says, "Include geographic origin or recipe or main ingredient," and I am gonna share this too, so you can see what I'm doing. I don't know what I just did. Okay, sorry, I just broke something temporarily, it's fine. Okay, so now you should be able to see it too. So it's just this little blue box down here. You should be able to click on something, and I'll even put something up too. Never remember how to spell this. All right, there, I tossed one up there. I'm gonna pause the recording for just a few minutes while everyone's writing, and then we'll regroup. All right, I think we'll get started and people can keep adding some as they would like. I love seeing some of these different recipes in here. So I added two myself, barekas. I'm sorry, I have no idea how to spell those. Um, Phyllo dough wrapped around all kinds of different fillings. I think the more common ones are probably potatoes or cheese, but for some reason my mother started doing them with tuna fish. They're actually really good, and other different fillings. I believe their origin is either specifically Israel or maybe just Middle Eastern, possibly Greek even. Um, I don't know I mean, feta cheese I know is the cheese they typically put in it, which to me is, Greece. So I'm guessing that that's part of their origin. And then borscht, which is the recipe I have is a chilled beet soup. There is also a hot version that has meat in it. The origin is Russia/Poland, which is where my family was from. I want to say that beets originated in Eastern Europe, but I'm probably wrong about that. Dinah, feel free to correct me. I'm not 100% sure. And then we have pierogies in here. You used to make them in your family. You've seen different origins over the years, but your grandparents would tell you they're from Poland. Definitely versions of pierogies are from Poland. And you would make them with potatoes, which, yes, I think from South America. I will also say, if you've never seen the book Dumpling Day, it literally looks at different versions of dumplings from around the world, and it includes pierogies, as well as I don't know if it includes barekas. It definitely has kreplach, which is a Jewish/Israeli version. Beets from Mediterranean region. Okay, so I was a little off. Um, Golumki, I hope I'm saying that right. Cabbage rolls stuffed with rice and meat. Origin Eastern Europe, Poland. The cabbage from the Mediterranean area. Another good question there. Not sure, Carolyn. Lindsay shares pesto from southern Italy, but the basil comes from Southeast Asia, which is very interesting. And then Dinah shares leftover spaghetti with ketchup for comfort food, which is such an interesting one. having ingredients from all over. The recipe origin was New York City pasta by way of Italy, by way of China. Yes, noodles have come all the way around the world. Ketchup from Southeast Asia that was altered in the US, um, and oregano maybe from Eastern Europe. That one I don't know either. And then pasteles. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Traditional Puerto Rican dish for Thanksgiving and Christmas. It looks like a tamal. Pastales were originally made by the indigenous people of Bornocan in Puerto Rico. Taínos made masa from cassava. Yep. Yushia, not familiar with that one, and squash. And the masa was then filled with beans, fruit, chilies, corn, nuts, meat, fish, and wrapped in a corn husk. Wow. I want to try that. That sounds really good. Um, so thank you for adding all of these and feel free to keep doing so. But I do want to switch back to our slideshow. So whoops, helps if I'm on the right page. There we go. All right. So just to dive a little deeper into that activity, and you can keep looking at the page if you have it uploaded. But I'm curious, what do you notice about the regions that were represented by our ingredients and what areas were represented by our recipes? Because I noticed something pretty interesting when we looked at where the recipes came from versus where the ingredients came from. And I'm curious to see what you've observed. So, what did we notice about where our ingredients were coming from when we knew versus where our recipes were coming from? To me, it feels like there's sometimes a disconnect between where the recipes were coming from and where the ingredients were coming from. So for some, just because the recipe came from a particular area doesn't mean that that's where the food, yeah, that's what Lydia's saying. Doesn't mean that that's where that food originally started, those ingredients, right? They started in other countries. And then when they got to those countries, they were used in different ways and created different recipes. So I found that very interesting. And what do you notice about the areas that were represented in terms of, what does this say potentially about some of our cultural and ethnic identities? Yeah, so Carolyn sharing a lot of those recipes are from Eastern Europe, but many of those ingredients had to travel. Um, it suggests that if many of our recipes were from Eastern Europe, that many of the people who shared might also have, links to Eastern Europe. We had some Central American recipes in there too. Um, but yeah, who's missing here? Who's not represented? What recipes and what areas were not really represented by what was on that page? Yeah, Claudia notices we are missing African, right? We don't have a lot of African ingredients or recipes here. I see absolutely nothing from Australia and New Zealand. Um, there was some South American ingredients, um, but not a huge amount. Not a ton of we didn't have a lot of Asian recipes. We had some ingredients that started in Asia. I also didn't see a lot about North American indigenous cultures either. Um, Barring the fact that the Puerto Rican indigenous culture that was mentioned is Central American, North American, but definitely there are many identities that weren't reflected here. And so I like to do this activity just to point out, where we all may be coming from and where are some of the areas that we don't necessarily have represented in this room, but may have represented in our community, and how can we um, find ways to um, encourage and welcome and centralize all of those different identities, the ones that align with ours and the ones that are different than ours. So I just think it's very interesting to do this to see who are we and who are some of the places that we're coming from, and who do we not have here that we would like to have here? Who do we want to make sure that we're saying, oh, well, you know what? I really don't have a lot of background in this area, but I want to make sure that that is reflected in my school. So I'm going to have to dig a little deeper. I'm going to have to reach out to the community, find those who would like to help me in this goal and would like to contribute so that we can fill in some of those gaps, right? Because as you can see, we have some gaps. We identify it. Now we need to figure out what to do next. All right, so we're starting to wrap up here, but I always just like to remind us a little beyond the gardening. There is so much more to be done around farm to school work. As we already mentioned, right now is a perfect time of year for maple sugaring. It's a very short time period. It can only be done in very few parts of the world, and we're lucky enough to live in one. So I definitely recommend taking advantage of the opportunity and talking about maple sugaring and how to do it and some of that process. Orchards and vineyards, right? Thinking about the majority of our fruit isn't grown directly from the ground. It's grown a little above the ground on trees and on bushes and vines. So making sure we include that because it's probably not something you're able to grow at your school, other than like strawberries, unless you have a lot of space. But it's really important for kids to learn about where these are grown, how they're grown, and the fact that most of them can be grown locally, just probably not on your schoolyard. Talking about honey and beekeeping and beeswax and all the incredible things we get from bees, talking about wool craft and felting, as well as all the other fibers that we wear, right? Yes, we wear wool. What about the rest of our clothing? Cotton is a plant. It is grown on farms. We kind of forget that, but like the majority of our clothes was grown on a farm. So we have cotton, we have alpaca and angora, which comes from rabbits, and cashmere, which comes from goats, and hemp, which is a plant, and flax, which is a plant and makes linens. So there are many different fibers out there, and many of them, not all, were grown or raised on farms. So it's important to remind children of where their clothing comes from too. Right. And then thinking about grains and baking, right? Most of us are not going to have the ability to grow grain with the kids, but we can also talk about how it is grown and how it gets to our table. Thinking about, the dairy, the meat, and the eggs. I know that you have to approach this with some level of caution. You have families that have many different feelings towards eating animal products, but I think it can be done in a respectful way. And I think it's important for us to know, that these are also things that are raised on a farm and that some people do eat them and it's part of their normal diet. Thinking about fishing, right? There's different ways to fish. There's fishing where you go out and fish and use that as part of your food, but there are also places where fish are either harvested or even raised for food commercially. So thinking about where is our fish coming from, thinking about how do we do food long term, thinking about drying, canning, preserving. I'll also say I forgot to put this on here, but things like mushrooms, right? There are mushrooms that can be either grown commercially or foraged in the wild and then brought to grocery stores. I don't recommend foraging yourself unless you are really well educated in mushrooms. I took an entire college class on them, and all I learned was that I'm not confident enough picking wild mushrooms to eat them. Um, but just thinking of all the many different ways that things are grown and produced for our consumption and use. All right. Finally, just some extra resources for you. And again, I will send handouts out after this. But ideas of places to get things. As I mentioned before, you can sometimes get seeds and seedling donations from local greenhouses. Think about ways to get discounted or free lumber from oftentimes lumber yards, like their old pallets that are falling apart can actually make really good garden beds sometimes. Reaching into some of those educational resources like students who might want to come in and do lessons, the local farms and the farmers markets, and then many different incredible resources that have recipes for you and best practices and curriculum. Things like Shelburne Farms and Island Grown and Mass Farm to School and Growing Minds. All of these are great websites to go to that have many free, downloadable, printable resources that you can use that are just incredible. So lastly, just a few resources that Mass Audubon can provide to you. So Mass Audubon offers a whole bunch of early education workshop series. This is our Kids in the Garden series, but we also have a whole bunch on nature-based education with young children, as well as water and how to incorporate that into all areas of curriculum. So you should definitely check out our website. We do customized trainings around whatever topic is important to your school. We've done ones on raising chicks and how to do it in a safe and productive way. There's our Nature Smart books. These are nature curriculum books for kids that we have written. I'm one of the main authors, and we have ages 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12. So you can definitely check those out. They're really fun for kids to use. We do site visits where we come and visit your site or do a virtual tour. You show us all of your outdoor spaces, and then we create a customized report for you where we share all kinds of different ideas of how you can use your existing space and resources to do either more nature-based or garden-based learning at your site. We offer curriculum consulting and coaching where we help support the development of curriculum at your site. And then our seeds program is basically that whole thing all together. So workshops, site visits, consulting and coaching, demo lessons for your class. So it's basically a deep partnership between Mass Audubon educators and your site, where we help your staff really develop their skills and their confidence so that they can continue to teach about either nature-based or farm-based learning in their class. So basically all the skills they need so they can do it on their own. And then check out our website. You can sign up for free for our quarterly early ed newsletter. It's the best place to go to find out where we're going to be offering other trainings. For example, in April, we're doing a whole bunch of our early ed workshops around how do you teach outdoors. And it's going to be offered through Macy. And it's pretty inexpensive. It's like $10 per workshop, and you get a discount the more you sign up for. So you'll find out more about that if you sign up for our newsletter, because we let people know when those are coming up. And then we have some free things you can download on our website. So we have 4 nature STEM-based units available in English and Spanish. They cover trees, soil, weather, and birds. And they're English and Spanish. You can download them off our website. All kinds of curriculum ideas for young kids. We have bingo cards that change seasonally on our website. We have nature play videos so you can see what it looks like when kids are playing in nature. We have our Young Explorer activity cards. So definitely well worth checking out our website for some free stuff you can use. Thank you all so much. That is a good way to get in touch with me, my email there. If you have 2 seconds to quickly scan the QR code, it's a very quick survey that just lets us know how we can better serve you as early educators who want to learn more about how to do all this work. And I'm also going to stick around for the next few minutes. So if anyone has any questions, you can either email me or I'll stick around. I will put that website up in here in just 1 second. Let me do that. All right, here is the website where you can find our workshops and you can sign up for our newsletter. And then if you want to get those free STEM units, I will also put the link for that because that is on a slightly different page. Here we go. Here is the link for the STEM units. There you go. Yes, if you sign up for the Mass, it's got to be the early education newsletter. So do it on the first link I gave you where it says early educators, because there's a Mass Audubon educators one, and then there's one that's just early educators, and that's where I'm going to put it. So make sure you sign up for one on the early education page. And yes, I will then have info about the April PD. And thank you all so much for coming to this. As I said, Dinah and her crew will send out a couple more handouts in the next couple of days with just some more resources for you to use. But you can always reach out if there's something that you need or you don't remember what I mentioned. Feel free to do that as well. And I will stop recording.